listeners, welcome back to Off, Over 50 and Fired. Now what? With Linda.
And Shelley.
So we've just finished our series on interviewing, and now we want to discuss the art of negotiations, which for most of us is extremely challenging. It is for me anyway. And what I found amazing was that the statistic that only 39% of people actually try to negotiate their salary.
So you're telling me that 60% of people, Linda, don't even bother?
They don't. They just take the offer and run.
All right, Linda, but you know what? Before we get into that stuff, let's just talk about our red wine recommendation for the week. Is that okay?
That's fine. We're on to reds. It is the fall.
Okay, so for all you red aficionados, we've got something called Holy Trinity. It's a Grenache Shiraz. It's a nice blend from the Barossa Valley in Australia.
Cheers. So now back to salary negotiations. Before we go on, I thought it would be interesting to talk a little bit about who these people are who are not negotiating and going forward. And it's no surprise to me that 66% are women. Is that a surprise to you, Shelley?
No, not at all. We just don't do it well.
No, but I think what was shocking to me was that it was reverse in my mind what I thought. As you age, people are less likely to negotiate versus if you're younger, which is strange to me because you would think people with experience would actually want to try to negotiate, but that's not the case.
Well, I think because, as older generations, normally when you get an offer in, you think it's going to be fair and equitable. And also, based on that, you don't really know how many offers are going to come your way, and you get a little nervous, because they might be few and far between. So you don't want to, get yourself to be, kind of pulled out of the consideration set because you were negotiating too much.
But do you think, like, if you're younger, you have less to lose? So you're, let's say, let me take the risk and go ahead and ask for more?
Yeah, well, I think, with younger folks, like we talked about in a couple of our earlier episodes, they're thinking about these jobs as, maybe a 1 to 2 to 3 year gig and no more. It's not like, when you and I were used to think they're going to take us out, in a box. We're going to die there. People don't die there anymore on their jobs.
No, not anymore. You're absolutely right. It is, this whole dynamic of the workforce is completely changing, and that people are just kind of seeing these as short-term experience builders and then just moving on. So there isn't that whole relationship with the company and they're being sort of your parent and you're the child. I don't think that exists anymore.
No, it doesn't.
So one of the things that we wanted to talk about is that salary negotiations, when you normally think about it, it usually is at the end, right? When you've done all your interviews and they see that you're a great candidate and then they give you an offer. But sometimes, unfortunately, people ask about what your expectations are for salary right up front as part of like a recruiter, and they're just looking to see if what they're offering and your expectations are sort of in alignment.
Right, and I don't like when they do that. It really makes the hairs on the back of my neck kind of go up because I feel like it might be a showstopper and you don't want it to be. So I think one of the things you need to think about, Linda, is if it comes up right away, you talk about the fact that it might be, it's negotiable, but also like something like, let's focus on the skills, my skills and the requirements of the job, and then we'll get to it.
Right, so make sure you try to steer the direction away from salary negotiation and the salary being a big part of whether you will or will not take the job. And it's more about the fit with the role and the job and your skill sets.
Right. So try to move off it, right?
Absolutely. Move off it as much as you can.
So it's better to have you focus up front on the qualifications versus your salary. Now, if you actually get a formal offer, then, what are the things that you should really be thinking about, So suppose your salary is below your expectations, things that you can offer up to help beef up your base salary could be, if it was an internal recruiter that you were having conversations with and they didn't use an external recruiters usually charge like a 30% fee. So you could bring that up and say, hey, you know what? Bottom line is you did not use an external recruiter. There's some wiggle room. Can we leverage some of that money that you saved, help us look at it,
Yeah, and so that's one way is looking at, that's one piece, but you could also look at the actual scope of the position. So is there a way in order for it to get into that salary range that you're looking at is look at having more breadth in the role? Like, for example, if it only covered U.S., you can look at, well, let's see it expanding the responsibilities to North America, for example.
So one other thing to consider is the depth of responsibility. So for an example of that, expanding them, say you work in finance and you do short-term planning, but you also have done long-term planning in the past. So you might say, you know what, why not do, I'd like to do both long-term and short-term planning, expand the level of my responsibilities to help beef up your base salary.
Right, and the other thing you could look at is the benefit side and looking at beefing those up too.
Yeah, so such things as, maybe a bonus, right? How do you get a bigger percentage of your bonus? Maybe you get a signing bonus, maybe your options and the time for vesting can be shortened, which would be really cool. Or it might be things like vacation or family leave. God knows I need a lot of family leave with my mother, right? Or flex hours or, being able to work remotely so that you can take care of family needs.
Right, and it could also be things like medical or dental or vision plans or wellness plans that you may be interested in. The other thing is about like 401ks and investment and what's their percentage of contributions. So you kind of really have to understand when you're going into this what things are most important to you in your life right now. Is it healthcare? Is it about investing? Is it about, having the flexibility to be able to take more vacation and family leave and all of that? Understand what those are so you can be a better negotiator. You know what you would like to try to drive, and you can have a better conversation when you've thought about that up front versus just doing it by the seat of your pants.
Absolutely. And I think one of the other things that I thought was really cool that we had at our old job was, they had a cost share for a commuter program, so that was really cool. So, for example, like the company contributed to our commuter account and it allowed for some pre-tax dollars, which was really helpful.
Since Shelley and I are terrible at salary negotiations, we thought we should go out and seek some help. We actually found this person, Phil Reeve, who is an executive recruiter who has a business called Reeve Associates. And he's outlined 7 tips to consider when you're negotiating salary. We have the references and links on our off toolkit, which is on our website. So Shelley, give us the first tip from Phil.
Sure. The very first tip, Linda, is about doing your homework, right? Make sure you really know what your real market value is before you actually start your job search. And you want to make sure that it's really objective. And so you want to also make sure you're right in line with current industry standards, right? So, and you want to make sure you're getting that information from a reputable source.
So what are some sources that maybe our listeners can use to get those numbers?
Right. Well, like you said, Phil Reeve, he has one, on his site, reevejobs.com. And there's also another one called payscale.com where you can get your information. But it is really vital that you think about these things and have a reasonable amount that you want to go after. And that should really be based on your experience and your skill set.
Right. So that's tip number 2, is that you really have to be realistic and ensure that what your expectations are going to match the actual job and what the job posting has been. So really focus on those jobs that are really going to match your salary expectations, or where you feel you have the ability to be able to talk about the value that you can bring in your experience and convince them to possibly move up into the range that you're thinking of. But first thing is keep it real. Based upon the external sources on the different ranges and then what you're seeing in general for job offers for those roles, is what you're expecting really realistic? You have to keep it real.
Yeah, and number 3, which I absolutely love because we suck at negotiation, is if you have the luxury of having a recruiter working for you, you basically have them pre-negotiate for you on your behalf. And you make sure that when he's doing that pre-negotiation that you start to have those upfront conversations around what your salary expectations are, so they get to do all the heavy lifting and you don't have to look like the bad guy, that you're nickel and diming or whatever. And also, you want to do that, again, beforehand, because once that offer is written, it might be really difficult to change the numbers.
Right. Really utilize that recruiter if you have that person working with you. So whether or not you use a recruiter or negotiate directly, you should always thank the company directly. And that's tip number 4. Always express gratitude to whomever extends the offer. They're inviting you to join the team, and you want to make sure that you're grateful and that you give a response back.
Yep. Absolutely. But, also tip number 5 is once you thank them, is you also want to make sure you give yourself enough time, so take a breath and review the offer in detail. because it's a really important decision. So you know what, if you want to spend some time and float the offer by some family and friends, get their feedback, and or if you've got a recruiter that's working for you, have some conversations around, with them as well. You just want to make sure that you're looking at all these different things, whether it's the salary and the bonus, the whole compensation package.
But unfortunately, you can't leave them hanging. You can't just take your time. And that's number 6. You have to give them a definitive decision, and you have to do it within a reasonable amount of time, right?
So Linda, I can't go on vacation and then maybe come back and call them or email them in a little while after that?
No, I would say no. That would not be a good thing to do. That's not going to make them thinking that you're really taking the offer seriously and that you really want to join. So, of course, I think your suggestion, tip number 5, take your time, tell them you need to talk to your family or, look at the offer. You actually may want to come back with a counter. So are you going to accept it right away, what they have, or counter it? And you may be going back and forth, for a few days or maybe even up to a week. But again, I don't think you should leave a company, over a few days without responding back to them, either with a counter offer, or you can also say, you know what, I need a little bit more time. I really didn't have enough to go over through the benefits package, or I need to talk to some additional people or my financial advisor, and I need a few more days. I just think you need to make sure that you're responding back in a timely fashion.
Yeah, and you know what? If you don't take the offer, right, you've really learned a lot. And so that's important. I think tip number 7 is if you don't take the offer, you're learning, you're building your skills, and you're acquiring experience. So you start to get really good at the art of negotiation and preparing your answers or whatever, but it's a learning experience. And
the other thing is that part of this whole negotiation process, I think it's actually good to try to counter when you do get an offer with some, could be even just small compensation and or benefits, just to see how they react, because that can tell a lot about the company and its culture and how they may treat you when you're actually in the company itself. So I always think it's kind of good to come back with just 1 or 2 small points, even though you're happy maybe with the salary or you're happy with the majority of the benefits package. Just see what the reaction is in you coming back with some items.
Yeah, because you might see their true colors, to your point, and think, I don't want to be on that team. It might give you some helpful hints and tips in terms of how they're going to react. And if it doesn't happen, and you want to negotiate, you really want to make sure that you're focusing in on the value that you bring, right? And there's no harm in letting them know that you're disappointed with the salary, and you can even cite some sources, where you've come in with what the averages are for your industry.
Right. And the other thing is you also have to weigh the salary part with the compensation. You shouldn't forget about the compensation, the benefits that go along the entire package, and what trade-offs are you willing to make. Going back, understanding where is there flexibility for you and where there are absolute needs that you have to have in the benefits or compensation package. Because one might outweigh the other and you need to consider them carefully.
Right. So for me, Lynn, one important really negotiation point is the flexibility to be able to work from home so I can take my mom to places that she needs to go.
Right. And for me, I think it would be more the ability to have some flexibility on vacation. Because I've been in the workforce for so long, I'm already used to about 5 or 6 weeks off. And so I want to see if I can get back up into that range when I take this offer.
That's right. You need that time to let that brain rest and the body to rest.
That's right. So hopefully those 7 tips are helpful to our listeners and that they'll allow you to feel more secure and confident when you go into negotiating for your salary or even just trying to negotiate, like taking that step to counter offer.
Right, and it's just good practice.
And what do you mean by practice, Shelley? How would you practice with someone?
You could, you think about the things that might come up as sticking points. So if it's all around the salary negotiations, how do you talk confidently about the fact that if they didn't use a recruiter or whatever, just get confident in how you would answer these things so that when you're having those conversations, you're prepared and you're ready and you don't feel like, oh my God, I can't do this, because you want to be able to, stand up for yourself.
No, I think it's a good idea to have someone sort